Devolution is a process, not an event, and delivering Scotland's devolved Parliament was one of the highest priorities of the incoming Labour government of 1997. That was delivered in record quick time. It is now 16 years since this Parliament first met on the Mound and elected Donald Dewar as First Minister. The Scotland Act of 1998, which Donald Dewar delivered, was rightly praised for its clarity and directness. Critically, it provided that what was not reserved was devolved. And that provision removed a whole range of potential difficulties before they could arise, a point to which I will return in a moment. It also ensured that further devolution was bound to follow. Anything government did not do before 1998 but came to do afterwards would be devolved unless a specific decision was made to reserve responsibility for it to the United Kingdom Parliament. And so the process of devolution did follow. Just as the original Act implied, it was soon enhanced by both legislative and executive devolution of further powers. And on top of that, we have had step changes in the scale and scope of devolution with the Calman Commission and the Scotland Act of 2012, and now with the Smith Commission and the Scotland Bill we expect to see next week. Indeed, with the Smith Agreement on the Crown Estate, we have a high-level commitment to devolution from this Parliament to Ireland and other communities, a commitment which I was glad to hear the Deputy First Minister repeat today. And I would remind Rob Gibson on that subject that the Smith Agreement commitment to further devolution to a local level was of the management of all the relevant economic assets, including the seabed, the foreshore where appropriate, and mineral and fishing rights. We cannot now pick and choose which aspects of the Smith Agreement we want government to implement.
Gibson.
I thank the member for taking an intervention. I think when we're talking about deciding how these things should be done, it's not a question of whether the people at the most local level should control them, but we have to have a structure in which they do so, and the obvious place to do that is in this Parliament. Do you agree?
Lewis MacDonald.
Well, I think what's important here is that the committee has come together across parties to call for the implementation of the Smith Agreement, and that's not a call that any of us should back down from, no matter what practical challenges are in the way in making that happen. But as has been said, this scheme to devolve devolution within the United Kingdom has been endorsed by every party in this Parliament, including those which campaign to leave the UK. And that is the significance of the Smith Agreement. No party here today can reject that agreement because every party has signed it and undertaken to deliver it. At the same time, parties can argue for powers beyond Smith. We have done that today and others have done so too. And likewise, we have signed off the committee report on a cross-party basis. But at the same time, we clearly do have different views of the relative importance of different parts of the Smith Agreement and of the areas where the draft clauses fall short or are unclear. There may be issues of interpretation, there will be questions of priorities, there are differences of philosophy as well. And when a number of us, as Bruce Crawford said, met the Secretary of State for Scotland at Whitehall this week, he, the Secretary of State, emphasised the issue of interpretation. But there should be no dubiety about how to interpret the intention of a new devolved power to create top-up welfare benefits. Since the Smith Agreement does not envisage claimants facing a clawback from other income, neither should the next Scotland Bill. Nor should the commitment to devolving employment programmes currently contracted by the DWP be artificially limited in the way the draft clauses propose. And devolving the power to abolish the bedroom tax is the clear intention of the Smith Agreement without disadvantaging those who receive discretionary housing payments. We would, of course, go beyond Smith in those areas. We would wholly devolve housing benefit rather than see it absorbed within universal credit, and we would seek to ensure that housing support was used in a range of ways to benefit those in greatest need, not least in providing more and better social housing. Scottish Labour's priorities will be to use the new fiscal resources and the new spending powers to protect those in the lowest incomes, as well as to support the creation of jobs and opportunities through devolved employment programmes. The Smith Agreement allows us to do much of that if it is delivered in full, and that is our priority at this stage. But if we go back to first principles, the legislation we see next week will inevitably lack some of the clarity and simplicity achieved by Donald Dure's original Scotland Act. That Scotland Act grew out of a constitutional convention. That was not an all-party process, although it had the support of a number of parties here. But nonetheless, it grew out and developed and came as a statute from that Labour government with a very clear basis on which the devolution settlement could devolve. Under that Act, broadly speaking, powers and areas of responsibility were either reserved or devolved. Now, as has been said in the debate already, responsibilities which were previously reserved are to be shared in future, whether in areas of taxation or in areas of public spending. That must inevitably mean a less clear division of powers in the future devolution settlement. That simply reflects the complexity of the Smith Agreement itself and the choices which have been made in that context. On welfare, for example, the simple model of reserving the whole area of legislative responsibility for social security is to be replaced by a new web of exceptions to reservations and exceptions to exceptions. And likewise, the devolution of the Crown Estate is to be done by way of a scheme to devolve its economic assets, rather than simply by removing the Crown Estate as a whole from the schedule of reserved powers. Now, some of the flaws identified in the report can be sorted by intergovernmental agreements or by relatively straightforward changes to the draft clauses. Others may require more far-reaching amendments. But whatever we do, I don't think we can credibly insist on implementation of the Smith Agreement and then claim that the lack of coherence of that settlement means it cannot stand. If all parties compromised in order to reach the Smith Agreement, and all parties have taken a mature approach, as Bruce Crawford called it, to agree today's report, then all parties must get behind the new, more complex devolution scheme once it has been delivered and make it work. And whatever the outcome of the parliamentary process over the next few months, it will mean both parliaments in future working within a more complex devolution settlement than we have done for the last 16 years. And how governments work together will become all the more important, as well as the mechanisms for holding ministers to account by elected members of both parliaments. Bruce Crawford highlighted the committee's call for the general principles of intergovernment working to be placed in statute. I was somewhat surprised to hear John Swinney appear to reject that view, but that is no doubt an issue we will return to before too long, and indeed he may have something more to say. For now, we support this committee report as a yardstick by which to measure the bill which is produced next week and the basis for the next stage in the process of devolution.
Many thanks.